You'll be surprised by what we opened with this morning now as a result of that.
Oh, look, Rumble's down. So open up while I go ahead and fix that, Norm.
So, look, welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. It's Tuesday. It's not beginning to look a lot like Christmas, at least in southern New England. It's beginning to look a lot like World War III ended yesterday. The wind-blown rubble of a stormy day is everywhere. But hey, that's life. I understand there's a new Madonna album coming out. I read about it this morning, or at least I read about the material that'll be worked up for the album. It'll be called Comatose. Madonna was in a medically induced coma a couple days the other day. I hear they recorded her while she was out. The question is, will anybody be able to tell the difference between the non-comatose and the actual Madonna? As you can tell, I'm not a Madonna fan. Hey, well, so let's.
Neither am I.
What? Why not? What's the matter with you?
I guess I don't know. Here, hold on. Let me get this new Rumble thing.
Yeah. Hey, Rumble, get it together, people. What is up with Freedom Lover? No, Emmy. Okay, are we supposed to know what that means, Mike?
Huh?
Noemi.
Morning, all. Noemi. I don't know.
Well, Freedom Lover, we love you. English is optional in most counties of the United States, apparently, and yours too. But it isn't here. If you want to communicate with us, you've got to use the shared symbols and symbiotic meanings that are attached to the English language, because that is how we communicate here. Never mind.
We just got Rumble up. It may have been a user error, but okay, we're live over there just in case you want to go back, Dawn. But if you want your comments to show up here, stay on YouTube.
So I'm broadcasting from home this morning. My wife traveled out to be with grandchildren last night abruptly. And so the squeaking in the background you hear will be my dog bringing me an infinite number of toys trying to get me to play. Normally we're in the office at this hour, but not today. So sorry about that. Hey, so query, is it time to defund the Bronx Defenders? The Bronx Defenders is a 400-some person organization that is designed to represent and intended to represent the underrepresented. That is, people without means. They do so in criminal cases. They do so in civil claims, housing, for example. And they are an aggressive, progressive legal organization. But it's also a legal organization. In other words, it's an organization that has clients. Something's tearing the Bronx Defenders apart right now, and it's the Israeli-Hamas war. Now, help me understand that, someone. I represent a young single mother about to be evicted from her home in the South Bronx. It seems to me that her interest is obtaining housing for herself and her children and remaining in that housing as long as she can. It seems to me that if she needs a lawyer, that lawyer's professional responsibility is to represent that interest. Similarly, I'm a young man accused of a narcotics or a firearms offense, and the state of New York is prosecuting me. I face incarceration. I expect my lawyer to be in court fighting for the best possible outcome for my case. My interests is my liberty and maintaining it as best it can be maintained under the circumstances. That's a lawyer's job. A lawyer's job is to identify their client's interest, advocate for their client's interest, be a zealous advocate on behalf of that client, and obtain the best possible outcome for their client with the informed consent of their client as to the strategy and tactics that requires communicating with their client. That the law of lawyering can be summed up in what I just said. The Bronx Defenders apparently have forgotten the fundamentals. The organization is torn now, with a majority of people wanting to issue broad support for Hamas in the Israeli-Gaza conflict. And the result is they're losing funding, and people are beginning to comment throughout the Bronx and throughout the greater New York area that these are not lawyers they want to deal with anymore, because they're letting their politics get in the way of their clients' interests. I suggest that it might be time to pull the plug on Hamas. I've suggested that on the Bronx Defenders.
And that's not said lightly, right? Because, this New York Times article does a nice profile on just the metrics for the Bronx Defenders Office, but they carry 20,000 cases per year on average.
Well, they do, but others can carry it. New York has an assigned counsel pool. That is, private lawyers can be asked to take a case if they're in the pool and represent a client at a reduced rate, a state-supported rate. It seems to me that if the Bronx Defender's Office can't, if the members of the Bronx Defender's Office can't set their politics aside or distinguish their politics from their clients' interests, they have no business being lawyers. And let me be blunt about it. In law school, I learned this lesson the hard way. I was in a criminal law clinic, and we were talking about the mechanics of plea bargaining, and how often people were enticed to plead to things that they didn't really do to avoid the risk of a worse outcome at trial. And, being the naive young moralist that I was, I said, that's outrageous. What if we all just refused to stop pleading? That would crash the system, and it would require the state to make better elections about who to pursue and when. And the professor stopped me dead in my tracks. He said, that kind of thinking will get you disbarred. I said, what do you mean? He says, you've got clients with individual interests. If it's in a client's individual interest to cut a deal to minimize the risk of a bad outcome, it's your professional responsibility to do it and to not let broader public policy concerns get in the way. And I think that professor's lesson is well put here to the Bronx Defender's Office. So I'd encourage people to take a look at the article.
One thing I've learned here, Norm, I didn't know this, I'm sure you did, but I didn't realize that public defenders' offices were unionized.
Well, in New York, everything's unionized. I mean, in New York, you need 5 extra minutes to evacuate your bowels in the morning. You've got to write a request to the sewage union to sit on the squat for a little bit longer. No, they are unionized. The Bronx Defenders are, as is, I believe, legal aid. But the collective bargaining agreement is designed and intended, I presume, again, to represent the interests of the defenders. That is, to assure they have the best terms and conditions and compensation package possible. But what is the purpose of the terms, condition, and compensation package? The purpose is for them to be able to serve the interest of their clients. Now, the left wing within the Bronx Defender's Office takes the view that these interests are best served by adoption of a broad, full-scale embrace of a progressive agenda that takes a mature look at history and social forces and recognizes that people who come to them with legal problems presented from within a social context, and that addressing those legal problems without addressing the social context is only half a solution. In other words, you're just taking the tip of the iceberg and ignoring the iceberg that keeps pushing other tips over the surface. Maybe, but that's largely a political task, and lawyering isn't political. At least it's not supposed to be.
Sure it is. They're saying it is here.
Level of a courtroom.
This is the letter that the Bronx Defenders Union issued on October 20th, which is the main subject of the article. I'm going to quote here. We understand that even acknowledging the suffering of the Palestinian people at our workplace can come with consequences. Recently, Bronx Defenders staff were subjected to a settlement agreement approved by the board of directors and without consent of the union that forced all staff participation with the Louis D. Brandeis Center, an organization that is proudly Zionist and that describes, quote, anti-Israelism on university campuses as the leading civil and human rights challenge. And yet, despite these attempts at silencing support for Palestinians, we will not be intimidated. We recognize that our duty to speak out and defend Palestinians is deeply rooted in our commitment as public defenders and unionized workers. So I'm not really sure what this letter, and I'm saying this in truth, and without prejudice. I don't understand what the point of this letter is. Truly.
Well, I mean, the point, it's gratuitous moralism. I mean, the worst sort of progressive activist is a person who thinks they have to have an opinion about everything, and that everything's connected to everything else, and that if a person is going to be incarcerated because they broke the law, that's less significant than the fact that we have a carceral society and that systemic racism has selected this person, and only by addressing the root and the branch and the cause of this particular person's problem, will we ever be able to achieve something like justice here on earth. And because it's our duty to seek justice, we want justice for the Palestinians from the river to the sea. And by the way, my client's not guilty of speeding. There's just a disconnect there. And people in the New York criminal justice and civil justice system are getting sick and tired of hearing from these disconnected moralistic harpies who are polluting the courtrooms with their gratuitous politics. So my view is, so long, Bronx defenders.
Oh, and this
Assigned
is
counsel
sort of
do
the
work.
latest scalp being claimed in the social justice movement that you were just describing. So the paragraph after the one I just shared is proof positive of that. And we've talked about, St. George Floyd on this stream multiple times before, but just listen to the way that this is put together, Norm. This is the last thing I'll read on the topic, then we could transition to what we'd like to talk about with respect to the Southern District of New York. Quote, as public defenders defending the most demonized and oppressed communities in the United States, poor, criminalized, immigrant, Black, and indigenous people, we are familiar with how the U.S. political establishment legitimizes state violence against our communities through courts, prisons, police, deportations, and the media. We recognize these same tactics at work in Israel's 75-year occupation and its apartheid laws enforced by Israel's military and increasingly fascist court system. We are also familiar with how the U.S. political establishment attempts to manufacture public consent and support for Israel's violence against Palestinians by repeating unverified reports, lies, and misinformation. This is the union for public defenders in the Bronx.
And if they are representing me or my son in a discrete conflict with the state, I'm like, I zoned out while you read it. It sounds like, you're at an undergraduate beer fest and the only sober person in the room decides to read you from their C- social activism paper and you're too drunk to respond. I mean, that's just gibberish and chatter, and it has no place in a courtroom or in the representation of discrete people with real problems on a transactional basis, on a case-by-case level. You want to change the world? Run for office, run for Congress. You want to be a lawyer, represent your client within the shadow of the law, advocate for your client's interest. If you're representing indigent people in the Bronx, you're not representing Gazans. You're not representing Hamas members who on Monday rape grandmothers and on Tuesday declare themselves to be victims on the world stage. The good news is not all of New York City is crazy. The Southern District of New York, the New York Times reports, is readying prosecution against Hamas.
This is the New York Sun, by the way, not the New York
Sun. Thank you. Yeah, the New York Sun, which is rapidly becoming at least my go-to newspaper. I'm so used to relying on the Times. I'm going to have to get used to there's a new kid in town. It's the New York Sun. And A.B. Hoffman, whose works we've talked about before, is becoming the go-to journalist, the sort of Glenn Greenwald of the United States. He's got his finger on the pulse of many things that are moving, and he apparently has great sources. He reports that prosecutors in the Southern District, dozens of them, and investigators are preparing some sort of case against Hamas. Whether it is a criminal case or a civil case is unclear. Whether it will be focused at discrete individuals who will be charged with crimes or only at organizations who are involved in the fundraising support for Hamas is also unclear. But among the charges that may be considered would be providing material support to a terrorist organization. And this raises the playful possibility that the Bronx Defenders Union could find itself as a defendant in a Manhattan criminal courtroom. How might that work? There's case law in the United States that says if you raise money and this came up with respect to Kurdish separatists, I believe, in Turkey. If you raise money for a group that has a terrorist wing and you give money to the group, even if you give money to the group for its educational mission, to support its schools, federal prosecutors and the Supreme Court has upheld prosecutions for material support of terrorism if there's an opportunity cost attached to that money, meaning you give $1 to the education wing and that frees up another $1 to be used for terrorism. That's lending material support to a terrorist organization. Are the Bronx Defenders doing that right now? Are they receiving monies from people to advance the interest of a group who endorses savagery to achieve its aims and who embraces anti-Semitism? That's a little bit too polemical, an approach to Hoffman's piece, and it's unfair to him, but I had to get it out of my system. And now it is. But on a vanilla basis, this is a follow the money case. Hamas is awash in cash. According to Hoffman's reporting, Iran gives it at least $100 million a year to fund its operations. And there's a hedge fund at one point that had about $500 million a year of assets under its control to assist Hamas. Reports from Israel now that the Israeli Defense Forces now penetrated the tunnel network beneath Gaza, show an incredibly sophisticated and well-financed organization. There was a photograph of some cash found in one tunnel. It was the equivalent of $1 million US. That money wasn't going to schools. That money wasn't going to aid educational or hospitals or to provide social assistance to people in Gaza. It was used to keep them as pawns, angry and agitated at Israel, while Hamas went about the objective of destroying a nation state recognized under international law. And while it did so by means of the use of terrorism. So Hamas, if it is, in fact, and I believe it is, a terrorist organization, and people are providing material support to that organization, they could find themselves under the crosshairs of Southern District of New York prosecutors. And if that happens, I think all hell will break loose in New York City. Imagine somebody who's out there fundraising for Hamas, getting a subpoena, a knock on the door from federal agents. You're under investigation for providing material support to terrorists. What did I do? Well, you gave money to Hamas, thus freeing up money for Hamas to terrorize Israel and to kill grandmothers and rape babies. I was supporting justice for Hamas. And they pull out the Bronx Defenders Union statement, and federal prosecutors say, no, the dollar you gave to Hamas found its way into the coffers of a terrorist, and therefore you're going to be prosecuted. It's a divisive issue, and I don't know anything about Damian Williams, who is the United States Attorney in Manhattan, but he's vowing, according to Hoffman, to do his part to stop the money to Hamas. And as Hoffman noted, it wouldn't be the first time that his office took on terrorists. You know, they went after the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. They went after the Merchant of Death, Victor Boot. What's Boot's claim to fame, Mike?
Oh, well, you know, he was the Merchant of Death, but we apparently, after we had convicted him in the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center, not the 93 bombing, but after we had convicted him of arms dealing and offering material support to terrorists in the way that has been described here, we had him under lock and key. And then we needed an asset back for the U.S., and so we swapped him for Brittany Griner. So if everybody remembers that. But there's just a nice big circle here, a big loop that we're coming back to on the Victor Boot stuff.
Well, and you know, which raises the following question: do we take politics seriously in the United States, or is it something of a spectator sport? I mean, we needed Brittany Griner back in exchange for the Merchant of Death because you know, I still don't get that. I'm glad. I'm obviously happy for her, but keep an eye on these prosecutions out of the Southern District of New York. You know, if a Hamas member falls within the jurisdiction of the United States, they'll be prosecuted perhaps for some federal law involving the application of terror against American citizens, or even holding American citizens, as some are being held hostage. It's unlikely any of these people will fall into the hands of United States officials. What's more likely, in my view at least, is that these will be financial prosecutions. You know, language matters in politics. You know, you've got the Bronx Defenders obviously wanting to stand up for the oppressed and forgetting that they represent members of the Bronx, people who live in the Bronx, thinking they're Gaza lawyers. And now we've got stories in the press about Donald Trump resorting to Nazistic comments, apparently on the campaign trail. And by the way, think about this for a moment. Here it is. What is it? December 19th, or just a couple days from Christmas, but we're less than 1 month away from the Iowa caucuses. So if you're not ready for 2024, you've got just a couple weeks to get ready, because once the Iowa caucuses take place on January 15th, then we'll go through a series of primaries and caucuses in other states. And by May, we'll likely know who the two candidates are for president of the United States in 2024. And if you think things are raw in the country now, you ain't seen nothing yet. I suspect all hell will break loose. What did Trump say that got him compared to Adolf Hitler? Apparently, he talked about illegal immigrants poisoning the blood of the United States. And of course, this has the left all in a dither. This is demonizing the other. This is apparently yet another left-handed call to white supremacy, although it's unclear what white is in this context. And, I think it's a hysterical overreaction to Donald Trump. And I don't mean hysterical in the funny way. I mean histrionic, taking one piece of data and forgetting the significance of it. And I don't think the American people are blind by what's going on. The Sun reports that while Trump is making comments that demonize him with the left, in other words, commenting on what the mass influx, as many as 7,000 people a week pouring in over the Texas border, what that's doing to the quality of life in Texas communities and in communities at large. Instead of asking whether that's what he meant, people are assuming that this is a call to racial purity, in the same way that Hitler's Aryan nationalism was a call to racial superiority of the Aryan race in Germany. You're not a Nazi in the United States if you don't buy into the identitarian movement. You're not a Nazi in the United States if you happen to be Caucasian and you don't like the changes that are occurring in the United States. You're not a Nazi in the United States if you wonder how we're going to cope with 7,000 people sneaking into the country each week in Texas alone. That doesn't make you a Nazi. It makes you an American citizen with real commitments in your community and settled expectations about what life in your club, or the Vladimir Putin authoritarian fan club letter, and decided to become a neo-fascist designed to impose an authoritarian agenda on the world. No. The authoritarians in this world right now are big tech. The authoritarians right now are the public health state. The authoritarians right now are people in international organizations who have a vision of what global humanity should look like, how we should live, how we should conduct ourselves, what global norms we should all adhere to in the name of equity. Those are the people who want to impose a vision of the good from the top down. Donald Trump remains the canary in the coal mine. And the coal mine that empowers him is a sense of disenfranchised people, Black, brown, Latino, Asian, of every color, who have settled expectations and feel that their way of life is being overwhelmed and overrun. And if you look at polling results, Biden's down. I think his approval rating is at 32% right now. 34% right now. And one of the primary reasons for this is people are fed up about immigration. And they're all also fed up about inflation, something else that President Biden denies occurs. And so we predicted early in 2023 that immigration would be one of the hot button stories that drives the political narrative in 2023. And as the year ends, it turns out not that we were right, but that we saw the reality of events. And the polarization that's occurring now is particularly troubling, because what we see is the left embracing open borders is going to refer anybody that criticizes its policies as a Nazi, and they will demonize them. And then they will say that we're doing likewise, that on the right, we're demonizing them by calling them globalists. And in the end, there's just no real discussion about the reality of life that we're living. Again, I still haven't, Mike, seen any significant discussion of the Deaton and Case book on deaths of despair that was published just as the pandemic was taking root in the United States. Instead, we spent an infinite amount of time fussing over the unfortunate death of George Floyd while in police custody, a death that was in all respects unremarkable, by contrast to the overwhelming declining quality of life in the United States. Language matters.
Yeah, well, well, here's an update. I think I said this to you earlier, and I didn't mean for us to get on the topic, but this is as of this morning. Chicago moves to eliminate high-achieving school programs.
and the reason for that is
they don't want to pit students against one another and schools against one another anymore. Right? So chop off the head of everything and make everybody just exist in this box academically.
Well, and I've always had, not always, I've gradually come to the conclusion that one of the things inspiring in the immigration crisis is a perverse sense of global equity. If we can make everybody miserable in roughly the same way, then everybody will be equal. And so here we have another expression of that in the form of mediocrity in our educational institutions. Language matters. And how we speak matters. I'm very troubled by the European Commission's decision to take aim at X. Elon Musk's transformation rather of Twitter, because what they'll say is that speech on X violates EU hate speech restrictions and therefore must be eliminated from X. This will result in the European Union, in effect, dictating what we can do and see in the United States.
For irony, the launch of the probe is premised primarily on allegations of anti-Semitism flourishing on the platform, and this comes after Elon's appearance at the New York Times. What was it? The I don't want to call it the Blue Book seminar, but
no, I hear you.
It's essentially a Blue Book seminar. But it comes after he goes on the record and explicitly states, if anything, I am philo-Semitic, right? And shows himself wearing the dog tags given to him by an Israeli family whose family members were being held hostage in Gaza, right? This is so what we have, and then this is also in comparison to what we have covered here with the rise of anti-Semitism and the seeming forgery via algorithms of support for Hamas through brands such as TikTok, right? So what's really interesting is that this is supposed to, and everything I've got on the screen here on the latter part is supposed to be satirical. It is said in a very sarcastic way. This is intrinsically political, right? This is the law that is at bar here. The Digital Services Act was ratified by the European Union, by the European Commission in August of 2023. So this will be a case of first impression with respect to this new law.
And what does the law provide? What does it require?
So I've got a quick primer here, right? So what is the Digital Services Act? The overarching goal is to foster safer online communities and environments, right? Online platforms must implement ways to prevent and remove posts containing illegal goods, services, or content, while simultaneously giving users the means to report this type of content. And here's
I don't even know what that means. What is
it? Doesn't mean anything.
What does that mean?
It doesn't mean anything. It bans targeted advertising based on a person's sex. It's supposed to be some sort of civil rights application online, right? But what it effectively does is give sovereign governments such as the European Union, which appears to I guess represent the interests of all the sovereign governments in Western Europe at this point, gives them the ability to regulate what information makes its way to the individual citizens of the European Union at this point. And because Elon represents a set of opinions outside of the current Overton window, they are now announcing that they will be using their latest tool in online censorship and wield it against X.
Well, to me, it raises a really difficult problem. I simply don't want my sense of the world to be governed by a European elite or by a European governing institution. But yet, the primary and largest social media platforms are international in scope, and they have a nexus, or that is a point of contact with the jurisdiction of the EU. And so, the European Union has jurisdiction over X and what appears in Europe. If they are going to take enforcement action against X to keep that material from being published in Europe, the result could be that it won't be published in the United States as well. And so I don't know what the solution is. I don't know whether technologically it's possible to have a filter such that we can have broader freedom of speech rights and access to material in the United States than we do in the EU, or if this is a left-handed way of bringing a sort of dumbed-down agenda into North America. And
well, I don't know that it's that. I think that what guards X in the American domain is necessarily the First Amendment, right? But we have to be reminded that in foreign trade zones, foreign countries and territories of sovereign governments, there may not be such thing as a First Amendment. And Elon has been very clear about X's renewed focus on complying with the law in the destination country, right? So for purposes of this analysis, it's interesting to me that the European Union would even need to adopt some sort of word salad standard to take to borrow from MDMA on the Rumble chat there, would need to adopt something like the Digital Services Act in an effort to curtail X's presence and reach in the European Union as a territory. If there is no such thing as a First Amendment under the laws of the European Commission, right? If there is no right to speak, a right of a free press, what is it about the need for this tool to otherwise subvert the reach of X? And to me, what that is that there are still Western values that guide the legitimacy of the institution that is the European Union and the European Commission, and thus they must at least take some approach that preserves democratic values, right? But Elon and X, and here's the post from at Safety on X. X remains committed to complying with the Digital Services Act and is cooperating with the regulatory process.
That's too bad.
It is important that this process remains free of political influence and follows the law. X is focused on creating a safe and inclusive environment for all users on our platform while protecting freedom of expression, and we will continue to work tirelessly towards this goal. The goal is almost unattainable, in my opinion, unless X is willing to just be something unique in each country that its services reach. And I think that that's probably the model that it's trying to adopt. But at least with respect to your analysis, Norm, I don't know that it's directionally coming back westward. I think that he has already gained a foothold in the United States by acquisition. The issue is that there is a consolidation of geopolitical efforts, namely in the Ukraine region, right, with respect to Russia, namely in the Gaza Strip with respect to Palestine and Israel, and especially in more of the global supply chain that is anchored by China at this point, and then the BRICS system. There's a lot going on that Western reserve currency, as the U.S. dollar and the global reserve currency, is facing right now. And to me, control of information is the primary point of this digital war that
I think it's true
right now.
Well, you are what you read, and if you can't read much, you won't be much. So I just want to recognize a new contributor to the chat and ask a little about you, Junior Coltrane. Why do I think you're a troll? Donald Trump makes you hard. All these brown and blacks have exposed themselves as racist. Listen to the hate on white, yuck, yuck. How about the racist Boston mayor? Why do I get the impression we're being baited by somebody, potentially an
avatar? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, thanks for joining us, Junior Coltrane. We'll evaluate your comments as time goes by, but something tells me that you're a nose under the tent, and you might be happier on, perhaps the National Lawyers Guild page, or maybe you should get a job at the Bronx Defenders, or better yet, become a tunnel rat in Gaza. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to kill a grandmother, but it might help if you want style points, and you'll get free airline tickets on Hamas Air, captained by Captain Allahu Akbar. You buckle your seatbelts. Unless you're a Jew, you're in for a bumpy ride. So, folks, that takes us to the...
Before we leave. Yeah, a couple things before we leave. Well, maybe three. MDMA for PTSD says, wonderful stream today. Norman, Mike, thank you for saying that. T-Girl also says, it's no coincidence that this is happening with respect to X here, Norm, as many European countries are electing more right-leaning politicians, which I think that's an astute observation and should serve to sort of bolster, I think, what I was talking about a couple of minutes ago. I agree with that, T. And then lastly, there's someone here in the chat, Norm, that wants to really confront you. He says, what a great Monday night football game, with a couple smiling emojis. Do you have any idea who that might be, Norm?
I understand that Lawyer Will was abducted last night by a series of heterosexual transvestite nuns belonging to an obscure order that was once prosecuted by the Roman Catholic Church, perhaps the Cathars, and that he has been force-fed nonsense and somehow been permitted into our fantasy football league, Law and Legitimacy, and that by fluke of magic last night, he defeated my team largely on the performance of a defense that had been relatively lackluster throughout the year, thus driving me from the playoffs and giving him something to gloat about. But I know Lawyer Will to be a decent, modest, and humble human being who would struggle against the infirmities of his abduction by rabid Carmelite or nuns. And so I doubt that it's Lawyer Will. But if it is Lawyer Will, I'll see you next year. And I'm going into the transfer protocol. Junior Coltrane acknowledges we were right. He was trolling, but now I'm enjoying the interesting conversation. A little bit of flattery will get you some extra notice, Junior. Stick around. We may not always be right, and sometimes we glory in being wrong. But we're certain of one thing, that the larger world has gone stark fucking crazy. And we're going to endure the craziness and be on the other side once reason returns. You're welcome to join us on our daily discussions. Mike, how do people find us on Law and Legitimacy?
Junior Coltrane, since you're here, we're going to pick on you and tell you that we are here every day at 8 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. You can find us here on YouTube. You can find us on Rumble when it wants to cooperate with our desires to go live, and on X at LawPod Daily. You can also find the audio-only versions of these streams posted to wherever you find premium podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, wherever. And then you can probably find us somewhere else in the ether of the internet. We've been doing this for a couple of years now, Norm. Actually, probably more than 2 years, if you can believe that. So just for everybody who is planned to be joining us every morning, we will be taking next week off, and we will be discussing the future of this podcast, the content, the delivery, everything under the sun, and how we are going to take a step up during 2024 on your and our respective behalves. So you may perhaps tune in to previous streams. Maybe we will cut some clips from older long form interviews with some of the people that you've seen appear here, Mark Randazza, Mark Meckler, maybe all the Marks. Maybe we'll do a Mark redo next week while we're meeting every day. But for the time being, today, tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, we'll be here. So Norm, I will see you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Looks like YouTube, we hit an algorithm on YouTube. I don't know what's going on. All of a sudden, our live stream is just sort of going up here. I don't recognize it. So I just want to sit here and asking it.
Maybe we've just got a bunch of Antifa trolls. Hey, folks, look for jobs in the Bronx Defender's Office. You too can sell pencils for Hamas and perhaps be prosecuted by federal prosecutors for aiding and assisting terrorist organizations. But yet, everything is a terrorist organization unless we agree with you. Go elsewhere if you want to be censored. Otherwise, come back. We'll see you tomorrow. Welcome to Law and Legitimacy. Have a great day. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas somewhere.
Peace, Norm.